Barbara, welcome to the studio. Thanks for coming by.
Thank you. It's great to see the studio in the midst of the conference center.
And it's great to be at the conference. How is it going so far? Congratulations.
Thank you. It's a wonderful event. This is one of our largest events in years, and the excitement is palpable. So it looks like it's working out to be a great meeting, and I'm thrilled to be here.
So let's dive into NAEYC and the position statements. What are they and why do they matter?
Position statements are a way that NAEYC as an organization takes stands on issues that can be controversial, but brings together lots of different experts who are knowledgeable about different perspectives, may not always agree on an issue, but to come together and to reach consensus about an important issue affecting early childhood education. Position statements really guide everything else that we do. We've just adopted a position on advancing equity in early childhood education, and you see that throughout this conference. But we're really committed to making that permeate every aspect of our work. We're also working on a new revision of our developmentally appropriate practice position statement, which is probably the flagship position for the association. And that's another important aspect, is making sure that the position statements are regularly revised so that they can reflect current research and current
So
practice.
I want to ask you about both of those positions and both of those areas, the inequity and the developmentally appropriate. First, a quick follow-up on the hashing it out. You and I both know how those things can happen sometimes, particularly when you're looking for consensus. On the one hand, they can be contentious. On the other hand, sometimes those types of things can get watered down. How do you balance accommodating a wide range of views with the fact that you got to stand for something?
Exactly. That is the balance. And that's also a balance that early childhood educators and program administrators often need to do. And certainly in policy, wouldn't that be great if we could find that balance? And being willing to bring diverse perspectives together, to listen and to take into account what is there that I can say, yes, I can support that. It may not be my favorite point of view, but I can support it and then move forward.
Well, let me tell you, if you can pull that off, I think there may be a role for you in Congress. At the very least, you can help us, you can write a book on that.
Well, I would love it if policymakers would take our position statement on advancing equity and use some of those principles. I think they might find them very useful.
I'm sure that you would. I'm not going to touch that, by the way. But let's talk about advancing equity, and let's talk about equity in particular. What is it? How does one know it when one sees it?
One of the definitions that we really rely on in equity is that there are no differences in opportunity and achievement on the basis of physical characteristics or other dimensions that really have no meaning in terms of determining opportunity, or should have no meaning.
What one looks like, where one comes from, what one's physical abilities are, what one's
language the language one speaks. That these are things that should not be determinants, and yet they are because of a history in this country in particular of privilege that have been afforded to some and not others. And that's had lasting consequences that has really resulted in inequitable learning opportunities.
I want to ask you about another positioning statement, and the one that you said was being worked on, that you are revising. The NAEYC position statement on developmentally appropriate practice 2020. You're making revisions. Where are you now? Where are you going to? Why are revisions needed?
This is the foundational document for the early childhood profession that really sets a framework for what are expectations for practice by professionals. And when it was first adopted in the mid-1980s, shortly after we began our accreditation system for early childhood programs. And one of the reasons the position statement was adopted was that as we began accrediting early learning programs, the criteria that were used frequently referenced developmentally appropriate practice. And as we started making site visits, we quickly learned that there were many different interpretations of what that meant or what that looked like.
Probably both parts, probably developmentally and appropriate.
Right, exactly. And so we really needed to come to consensus to spell that out. And so it's been a really important statement. But frankly, it's also had many concerns that that it was too focused on normative views of development that primarily reflected the dominant culture of white, English-speaking, middle-class professionals who frankly have done most of the research in this area. And so over time, we have worked to try to make sure that in 1996, when the statement was revised, we added important concepts about understanding the importance of the cultural context for children's development. What's new in what we say now about this latest revision that we will have expect the board to adopt in spring of 2020 is that in many ways it is the principles are exactly the same. And yet profound change is needed. And the profound change that's needed is understanding what we need, how as educators and the broader community, to really focus on what are the strengths that each and every child brings to the learning process, and how might my biases be affecting my ability to see and draw on those strengths in order to provide the best opportunity for joyful learning for each and every child.
The so-called traditional definition of talent or capability is being rewritten. It sort of proves that education is not static, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And these are lessons that children need to learn as citizens of a dynamic, changing world, and being able to get along with each other, have the skills for inquiry, observation, and working together. Those are skills that are laid in the foundation of early childhood and will serve people well throughout their lives.
I was going to say lessons for children, perhaps also lessons for adults.
Very much so.
Barbara, thank you. Thank you for coming by the studio.
Thanks. It's been great to talk to you.